Clean, purified water is one of our most precious resources, but the average house in Ireland uses over 350 litres of it a day. And people often turn on the tap and then leave the water running down the sink when they're brushing their teeth or whatever.
It wasn't always like that though, Nolan. Do you remember on the Saturday night when all the kids had to get into the same bath? Once a week, Shane Lahan, that's what we had, once a week, and we were happy to get it.
Well, that's it, and that's what I want to talk about today. Having a bath, the whole tradition of how we washed long ago. And to do that, I went back as far as I possibly could. Believe it or not, I'm going to go back to the Bronze Age to begin this segment today, okay? Because what's so interesting is this, is that we used to have these things called phylacteries. The phylacteries were the ancient cooking places. But not only did they use the hot water for cooking, the steam that used to come off them. This is an experiment I did with my students a few years back. You can see the big trough of water heating the stones. But what happens very quickly is the steam starts to come off. So people used to use it as a kind of a sauna. But more than that, and this is the important part, we have a great account in Ireland of a couple called Mish and Dovrish. And Mish was this woman who went a bit mad. She covered herself with muck and dirt, went out. And Dovrish was the guy who brought her back. Now, it's a fairly salacious story. I can't go into the detail. But at the end of it, what does he do? He takes the ash, the wood ash that's there, with the fat from the meat, and he uses that as a rudimentary form of soap to clean her and to bring her back. And I think that's the earliest account that we have for soap in Ireland.
All the way back then.
Yeah, and what's really interesting for me in that, Dahi, is that all the soaps that you and I think about today actually come from that wood ash. So people used to burn ash, they used to burn wood, they used to burn ferns, bracken, they would take up all of that material, briars and so on, they would dry them, they would burn them, and that was their main source of lye, and lye mixed with any fat or oil gave you soap. So, for example, this is a soap that I purchased recently. It's actually from Syria, from Aleppo, and that's still made in exactly that same way. You can see the different layers that are there. So and that takes 1 year to cure. So when you have a bar of soap or a brick of soap, that's where that comes from. This is a great one that you remember. I was showing you this earlier. But actually that goes back as well, because when they made that sort of putty, they would put it onto a rope like that, a ball of it, and they would hang it up to dry. And that's where the original soap on the rope came in.
No way.
So it goes back to all that time.
And when you think about it, I suppose kind of in a way soap went a bit out of fashion, but over the last few years with all of the reminder to wash your hands, the one thing they actually said to go back to was a plain bar of soap.
A plain bar of soap. And you know, so and even when we were looking for the various soaps, and a lot of these things are going to remind you of long ago when you look at them here, one of the most prestigious ones were, I remember going in, if we had this one called Imperial Leather,
that,
right?
That was fancy.
That was very fancy, and that was kind of one to have to show off. We never knew whether it was Imperial Leather or Imperial Lather, and we'd always kind of say, oh, the Imperial Leather. We'd kind of mix it up in that sort of way, you know. So but there are so many different things that we can talk about, and one of the things you mentioned, the Saturday night bath, for example. Why was it on a Saturday night? If we go back to the Industrial Revolution, okay, what happened is people were working in foundries, they were working down mines, they were doing all of that thing. Saturday it wasn't even a day off, it was a half day. And you were preparing for Sunday. So Saturday became the day to have the bath. And you know, like we think about having hot water today, and we think we have plenty of hot water. But people used to have the old tin bath, as we called it, okay? They brought it in and people were put into the bath, as it were, that the father or the man of the house was there first, maybe. But you wouldn't waste the hot water. So the next person of the next age would come in, and of course, we were the last. I used to be always the last. I was the youngest in my house.
That was bad luck, you were the youngest.
That's it, you had the runt. But more than that, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Of course, that's the phrase that comes, because that's what we were doing at the end of all that. I'm really interested as well. You know, I've mentioned the Industrial Revolution, the great gold rushes, right? Up in the Yukon, up in Montana, up in California. People used to be out and they used to be panning for gold. They'd be out in the sticks, sweating, full of dust and dirt. They'd come into Dawson City or wherever it was, and there'd be a big sign up, hot bath. And you know what? They weren't hot baths at all. What were they? They were hot water, sure. They were an old tub. You'd stand into the tub, right? There was hot water in it, but it was the same hot water. There was a shower over your head, and there was a hand pump, and you had to hand pump away.
You had to do all
and
the
whatever.
work.
So whatever cleanliness you had in the beginning, you were just dousing yourself in all the same dirty water afterwards, you know.
Would that be the start of the shower as we know it today?
That's it, yeah. So we don't even think about that. And everyone nowadays has a shower they clean. But what's really interesting, Nuala, for me, is that long ago, people didn't want to wash. They believed actually that disease went into your body through your pores if you opened them up. So there was this whole kind of sense of never washing. And actually, when you think about it, people used to, there's a great expression, top and tailing, okay?
Yeah.
So people, you would, first of all, where would you get you didn't have to have a lot of hot water or cold water or anything like that because you didn't have it plumbed into your house, absolutely. So what you had therefore is that you had something here, like we have the jug and the basin that was there, and people might wash. The man in the house might have an old enamel basin by the front door where the half door was. He might, I often saw in some of the old houses a little sliver of a mirror that they fixed into the wall, and he might shave and wash there. But he never washed the way we think today.
Yeah.
I often remember that my uncle, when we used to be down in Port McGee, we'd be doing oats and, you know, stoking oats and stuff like that. I remember as well, we were down by the water just across there from Village Island. I remember my uncle, he'd strip off and he'd go into the water. And that was his way of, and we followed suit. We were young, we were the same. But what we were doing is that we were getting off the dirt because there was no way we were going back to my aunt's house. There was never going to be enough hot water. There was never going to be for all of us to be washed. So people took the opportunity to kind of cleanse themselves that way.
Shane, they used urine.
Okay.
What did they use urine for?
We have to think about, we have all the access to chemicals today, right, in all sorts of different ways. But soap, essentially, that potash we were talking about, that ash was either, sodium carbonate or potassium carbonate. The other was ammonia. Ammonia was another chemical, and that reacted with the wood ash. And people used to use that, you'd be delighted to hear, Nuala, for dyeing their hair. Okay?
No, I never dyed their hair, ever.
So what happened is that if you put the wood ash...
But is that the trick?
Yeah, if you put the wood ash into your hair on its own, okay, it would do a certain bleaching, if you like, but putting the urine into it as well. And John Dunton, the great bookseller who came to Ireland in the end of the 17th century, he remarks that all the women in Ireland had this magnificent yellow hair made by using what they called chamber lye, which was urine from the chamber pot. They'd put it in, and of course they'd wash it out afterwards to get rid of the smell.
Not to be disgusting, I think it was, did it have to be stale?
Yeah, stale urine.
Yeah, because they did the same thing for bleaching clothes, I believe, did they?
Well, they used all of that. Like when we think of the word that we use for clothes, a wardrobe, the garde-robe long ago, which was the French word as well, that literally was where the ammonia was coming up to get rid of lice and anything that was infesting your... because in the past, of course, you had things like fur. People were using different things, and you had to delouse your clothes. So that's where that comes from as well.
And what's the story then with, say, like deodorant? Because washing's one thing, but if you have a hard day's work after that again...
it's quite fascinating to think that I believe, and I might stand corrected, that deodorant was invented by an Irish family, okay? There's a group over in America, in Cincinnati, Ohio. They're called the Murphys, so they have to be Irish, okay? Yeah. He was a surgeon, and he found that his hands used to sweat quite a lot before he went into to operate. He found a kind of Fuller's Earth, which kind of a product, a powder, if you like, would dry his hands and so on and so forth. His daughter, Edna, she patented a deodorant for women in particular, and she called it by a brilliant name called Odor Oh No. Odor, oh no. That was it, right? And I love that idea. It says like, oh no, like so what happened is it never took off until 1913. There was a heat wave and everyone started to sweat and women's dresses and so on were being destroyed, and that's when it took off. So you can imagine then the next phase of that was in 1950s. 1951, the ballpoint pen was invented. And what happened was that the roller antiperspirant, the large one, that came into being. And then 1960s, the aerosol. So that's a huge industry now, all started by an Irish gang.
Just before we go, the immersion came along and all of a sudden it changed everything, Shane.
Well, listen, we long ago, you might remember, we had the meter out in the front. We used to put our 2 bob in, or our 10 bob in, and so that was fine. But when the immersion came in, long ago you had, of course, the copper cylinder, we had the back boiler heating that,
Yeah.
one bath, of course. By the way, when people got baths in Ireland in the past, they used to keep the coal in the bath. They had no other reason or function for them at all. But what was really interesting is that when the immersion came on then, we were terrified of putting the immersion on because it absolutely used all the electricity that was there. It kept going out. I remember one man was telling me they were halfway down to Kerry on their holidays with the caravan. Didn't they turn back because they thought the immersion was left on?
Oh, but it's such an Irish thing. You can get that on T-shirts.
Yeah.
We don't even bother with the immersion anymore because there were so many notes left. Please turn it off, and everyone forgets.
Yeah, it's on a timer now these days,
That's
thankfully.
it.
Shane Gurmila, Gurmagat.
You're welcome then.
And happy washing with all your lovely soaps there.
Take some of the pear soap. I'll leave some of the carbolic things for you. No.
I'm going to take this. This is gorgeous. It smells
Lovely.
beautiful.
Natural soap, yeah.
It's beautiful.
Bit like Shane, au natural.
And leave the rubber ducks there for the bath. So coming up, we'll see